Alpha Omega London, maker of shoes, creators of waves in the fashion industry, introduces Fashion Vanguards podcast. We aim to open minds, share knowledge, listen to opinions, and start conversations. Our podcast series unravels fashion's many guises and tackles head-on the current issues that matter, getting honest views from the mouths that matter. In this series, we'll be exploring how blockchain can impact the world of fashion by aiding transparency in supply chain, amongst other things. It's been just over 5 decades since TVs became common in homes, 4 decades since microwaves became popular, and less than 3 decades since cell phones became widely accessible. It's been just over a decade since the first iPhone was released, less than that since WhatsApp came out, and even lesser since Instagram was started. So these are not basic necessities, and yet in today's world, it's impossible to imagine life without all this technology and much, much more. In this first episode of the series, we'll discuss how technology is changing our lives and how we're responding to tech innovations around us. Then we'll move on to how technology is changing the fashion industry in particular, and the extent to which that has been embraced or rejected. Further, we'll speak briefly about the issue of sustainability in fashion and its possible technological solutions. In an effort to better understand and make others aware of tech innovations in fashion, we have some panelists with us today. They are
Nazina,
Gurdeep,
Daniel,
Raid,
and myself, Ashwini. There's just as much to say about how we respond to tech innovations as the innovation itself. What's the growing sentiment of how tech innovation is changing our lives? What do you guys think about this?
it's received in so many different ways. I guess there's a deep-rooted irony in that we as people, we demand innovation, but to some degree we don't really accept it.
Mm-hmm.
It's disruptive, very risky. It challenges the status quo, and it challenges how practical procedures are.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not necessarily entirely intuitive. So that
Exactly.
as well makes you sort of not trust
Yeah,
it.
as I said, it's something that's really coveted. We see the word completely misused, particularly of late, but we don't necessarily, we don't really understand it. I think that's probably what the issue is. And B, we don't in practice endorse it enough, particularly within industries, apart from what we can discuss a little bit further, that the fintech industry, which is, as we know, through various news articles, it's sort of growing, with this aspect of innovation. But I do feel that we are very sort of troubled by how innovation can actually affect our lives.
Yeah, but that said, I mean, we have embraced technology. Obviously, like I said, just 10 years ago, people didn't know what an iPhone was. And now all of a sudden, well, everyone has one. So,
Yep.
I mean, in that sense, even if it takes time, sometimes it has.
I think
been accepted.
there are a few elements that kind of force people into it, and I think a lot of it is pressure and acceptance, or social, pressure and social
and convenience
acceptance.
as well. Obviously.
Convenience,
I mean, once you get
absolutely.
used to something, it's hard to go back on it. So
I think another point as well is that innovation can sometimes be presented as a corporation to gain more profits, to be more competitive, rather than, I guess, the end user feeling as though it's benefiting them. So there's a little bit of sometimes the reason why there may be resistance to innovation is because maybe people just don't believe that it's going to make their lives or make themselves better. Maybe because they feel that there's an agenda for corporates to want to try and make as much money from us as possible.
what do you guys think about this?
Well, I probably echo that there's this guy called Paul Graham in Silicon Valley. He's in charge of Y Combinator, which is this big incubator. The value of their companies, they invest about $6,000 a company. It's now worth 80 billion, I think, their portfolio. And he says the thing you got to do as a startup in Silicon Valley is build stuff people like. So I think at the end of the day, it's the end user that will matter, especially when you've got these companies that rely on network effects. Having lots and lots of users and all of them being connected with each other is super, super important. And I think what these companies do in particular is they make what we do ordinarily more efficient. So say in communication. I think of dating apps, for example. We're all familiar. And you look at Tinder. You can swipe to your heart's content, and you can find out, someone in your nearby area. That makes life more efficient. On the other hand, I think the sentiment must be that it's ruining some of the scene. It's all communication happens over text. There's less in-person interaction. There's data protection questions. There's all sorts of disadvantages. So I think the sentiment, at least as I see it, is that we're entering into a more efficient world. We're entering into a world where things can move a lot faster, a lot easier, a lot cheaper. But there are a lot of trade-offs. Because this is so new, it's going to be a real... we're going to have a heart-to-heart with each other, everyone is, and with these companies, and figure out where exactly we want the balance to be.
I think as well that, talking about those trade-offs, if you think about privacy and you think about all the issues that come with that, we as a society are more and more aggravated by privacy issues. However, we're so quick to click agree to terms and conditions without reading even one line. So it's that paradox there that we as a society are happy with tech innovation, but we want to keep tech companies accountable for their actions. Classic example is the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica of late. And when Senate in the US was questioning Mark Zuckerberg, and if any of you had a chance to watch that, it was quite hilarious because it was a bunch of an older generation who was not exposed directly to the magical world of Facebook, and asking questions that would be considered stupid in other contexts, but because they're part of the Senate, you can't really say that to them. But coming back to the privacy issue, it's almost like we're now expecting things to move quickly.
Yeah.
In 1960, a man named McHale wrote a quote that said, "We're getting to this shrinking world," and he was talking about globalization, and essentially what globalization has done has created this expectation that we deserve more as humans,
right,
and we are worth more without doing anything to satisfy or to
sort of entitled
to get it
exactly so globalization, tech, privacy, they're all interrelated under this whole world of entitlement. And the fact that like tech innovation is going so quickly is that now from our parents we now expect the latest phones,
right,
we expect tech innovation, we expect to be amongst the times. And I think that while tech is all amazing, I think people need to realize if they sit from like kind of an overarching superstructural level, they'll start to see what tech really means. And I think what tech really means is what people are doing for startups and how they're trying to influence the world, not so much what you feel
for the better good
or the worse good, but in the sense that tech companies, people who start tech companies have that understanding of tech, while the end consumer just feels like they need it because they need it, not because they don't understand why they need it.
Right.
The question why is never asked. It's only asked when something bad happens, like Cambridge Analytica. But before that, Facebook was using our information for years and years and years. An example of that, Facebook owns Instagram.
Yes.
So I was on a flight back from the US, and I bought Airheads from this shop, and then 2 days later on Instagram I had a ad come up for Airheads. So all these things, like, it's a paradox, and we just as a society need to understand that.
So I guess our relationship with innovation is partly it can be I guess justified because there are sort of drawbacks to the advancements that we're currently,
especially if we're not careful about things, sometimes it can be.
It's also really unavoidable as well because it's out there. We live in a society where we're surrounded by tech.
Just a quick reminder, you're listening to the Fashion Vanguards AO London podcast. Please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on, give us a review, and carry on the protest. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. Nazina and Gurdeep, you guys from a fashion background, what do you think about how the fashion industries embrace tech innovations? Because we've been talking about general tech innovations, but what about specific to the fashion industry? What do you think?
Well, I can only sort of draw an example from the retail, sort of industry, and we've heard of the retail apocalypse. We've heard of the sort of the administration issues that House of Fraser are currently undergoing. And that's because, a lot of these brick and mortar type retailer business models, they haven't quite adjusted to tech innovation. And so, their business models are so old that it's very difficult for them to change and shift and adjust to anything that's new, particularly at the pace that everything is currently running at. And as a result, they're suffering. I do feel
like it's almost like fashion is just kind of staying behind in a way. Like the brands, if they're not adapting to technology, they're just wiped out because the consumer demands a lot more. The consumer is different compared to how it was before.
That's it, absolutely. And because consumers are now that they have digital footprints, they shop online more and more so than they were doing before.
Definitely.
And so there's so much shift in terms of what consumers are demanding, but it makes it very difficult for certain businesses and business models to adjust to that, as I was saying, at that pace. But what I wanted to say was that a lot of tech innovation, particularly for those online retailers, are really geared towards furthering profit. They're not geared towards the betterment, or maybe the focus is not necessarily on the end user. It's mainly about doing things more efficiently. And you've got Amazon, who are like Amazon, Baidu, and Alibaba. These corporates, these giants almost, that they have that blueprint of what it takes to be a successful online retailer. It's about providing a service, getting products to you as a customer as soon as possible in the most efficient way. But I do find that fashion sort of needs to adopt and needs to change. Maybe just the sort of the investment that it places on sort of new processes or new tech, that's almost mainly for the greater good, because that's where the fintech world is going. But the fashion world is it's very slow, as you were saying, Gurdeep. It's very slow to sort of, it's almost like it needs, for the other industries, it needs more use cases, more successful use cases to sort of justify, the sort of, I guess
only
if
it
step.
sees a sort of guaranteed benefit, then it's likely to go into it. I mean, of course, I think that is changing. Like, even just at my university, so I study fashion design and development at London College of Fashion, and our syllabus is actually changing next year, and it's changing to, we have a whole unit, a 20 credit unit, I think, just about fashion technology. So it's about using laser cutters, it's about using 3D printers, all of these sort of things that potentially is also, things like 3D printers reduce waste. They're not just necessarily profit oriented.
I think that's what we need more of. Because
I think
at
it
the
is
moment
increasing
it's more like marketing and technology. Like
not as much
in engagement.
Engagement, yes. But not much in the clothing itself. And it would be interesting to have it in the clothing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that is happening. Like I said, it's just quite slow compared to other
it sort of needs to catch up a little bit. And I think another problem is, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth, is just investment, because I think a lot of these processes, especially tech innovation processes, that they require a lot of investment. So I think to a degree, these fashion sort of businesses, that they're working on very traditional business models, and they just sort of need to reflect and look back on what it is they're doing. Maybe they need some sort of review to really sort of look at how they're going to go forward. But, to kind of have a slow uptake on this is really going to be to their detriment. But at the moment, online retailers, they're flourishing. They're doing really, really well in comparison to brick and mortar. But that's only momentary.
Yeah, so I think this has sort of led us to the topic of sustainability.
Absolutely.
Which is really what this is a continuation of. I think So in AO London's previous podcast series, which was about sustainability, we discussed the issues of sustainability in detail. And to the listener, if you haven't already listened to that yet, I recommend that you do, because that'll
Absolutely.
definitely better help you understand everything that we're about to discuss in this series. And we discussed how big an issue sustainability actually is in fashion. And we came to the realization that it is, in fact, a huge problem.
Massive problem.
And it can't be overlooked. Our planet's resources are finite, and human rights are being violated every single day in the process of manufacture. We discussed in depth the possible solutions for this, and we came to the conclusion that it's in everyone's hands to take steps towards a more ethical, sustainable community. So as consumers, we make the demands, and hence we do have a large role to play. But there's also large companies and the government that play an equally large role, really, because if not a more important role, because they can really create waves given the control and influence they have over happenings in the industry. Awareness regarding the issue is key. It's increasing, but not enough action is being taken.
Yeah.
And amongst, say, like the enlightened crowd, if that's what you want to call it, the people who actually understand sustainability and want to live more sustainable, ethical lives, a major concern is transparency, which I think is what
Yes,
this podcast
and
is really
traceability.
going to
Yeah,
address.
yeah.
Because if you do want to shop ethically, but you don't really have a way of tracing back the manufacture process, then
Absolutely.
that becomes very difficult. So, especially given the complexity of supply chains nowadays in fashion. And so really the question is, could blockchain technology be a breakthrough to help this issue of transparency in supply chain?
I'm going to say yes, without going into any detail, because I just
What are everyone else's initial opinions? Yes, no?
I think it could. Yeah, I'm kind of.
if anyone was in the room just as that happened, that was Raid sort of giving a I don't know type of hand signal.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same, because blockchain's also really new. So it's I think I'll say some technology could be the antidote.
Right.
I don't know if blockchain especially and named and labeled as will be, but some technology
Perhaps a
will
combination of things as well.
Yeah,
There's so
things
much
that
coming
probably
up.
haven't even been invented yet.
Yeah.
So
I think we can definitely give it a go, because we do need some sort of better infrastructure to
Oh, I like you, Gertie. Great. No, I like that.
in the fashion industry. So I think we should give it a go and see how it goes. And of course, it's going to be hard to adapt at first, because blockchain itself is so new. But if we understand it well, then we can benefit from it.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think obviously it can make a difference to an extent, but I don't completely agree, because I mean, there are so many things that are already within our control that we don't need fancy new technology to do, and we're not even doing that yet. And one new piece of technology, how much is that really going to change? I mean, I don't know. We've discussed what blockchain does and how it can be applied in various industries, including fashion. The technology's benefits make a compelling case for how it can be used to make the supply chain more transparent. It does, however, have its disadvantages.